Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Guys Who Stare at Stats. I'm Cade Kennedy, once again alongside Tyler Riggs, and folks, we're now on to the Pac-12 portion of our college football preview, and as always, before we get going, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, because we're probably going to have some disagreements on this one, as Tyler and I have been talking about in between getting all of these set up. You're going to want to stick to the end of this one, or at least get to the Colorado section, because I'm pretty sure that's where we're going to have our main disagreements. But starting, of course, with USC, the Trojans, 11-3 last year. Of course, you returned Caleb Williams, the Heisman Trophy winner. And USC, I mean, Tyler, tell me if you've heard this one before. Lincoln Riley, Alex Grinch on a team, amazing offense, but they need to improve the defense if they want to seriously contend for a title. Tell me if you ever heard that one before.
Never have I ever. Actually, yeah. I mean, it's a story as old as time with us, right? I mean, we tried to warn the USC faithful, hey, your defense ain't going to be that good. And guess what the issue was last year? Defense. Guess what's going to be the issue this year? Defense. They got to get it done on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to be able to score at will. Caleb Williams, as we all know, likely going to be the first overall pick in the NFL draft next year unless something just catastrophic happens. He's as talented as they come, draws a lot of comparisons, understandably, to what Patrick Mahomes could do in terms of just the off-platform throws, you name it. He's got the smarts. He's got all that. He's got the weapons around him. Can that defense be the difference maker it needs to be? Didn't happen at OU with Alex Grinch. We thought it would at some point. It didn't. Maybe he finds it at USC. I don't know.
We will have to see, of course. But here's the thing with USC's schedule, at least, Tyler. You look at every game on it. I mean, of course, the big ones you have circled all the way down in mid-October. You're at Notre Dame, Utah at home, Washington, and at Oregon, and, of course, UCLA. Here's the deal with those games, Tyler. A majority of those, at least in my opinion, we'll get to it, have a similar problem. Washington also has had a bit of a defense issue. Oregon has had that issue at times. Sometimes it's more just inconsistency rather than anything else.
Sure.
Utah's kind of more the opposite. They are more of a offense would be considered a problem more than defense would, if there is a problem. Utah, I would say, is the most well-rounded of all the teams, of course,
Sure.
in the Pac-12. And then Notre Dame is they're Notre Dame. They kind of fluctuate depending on which team we're talking about. Last year, of course, the offense was a bit down at times. The defense would pick up the slack. We'll have to see what happens, of course, this year. But USC, I mean, they should start 6-0. There's no doubt about it. Trojans should be 6-0. Going to South Bend, it should be a fun one. You're giving me the smile look over there, which tells me either you disagree or you're just messing with me. I don't know which one. I'm going to guess you disagree.
No, I don't disagree. I'm just going to mess around and be like, well, you know, there is a certain Saturday, September 30th there in Colorado, in Boulder.
You're just saying.
I'm just saying. We'll get to that later, like you mentioned. But, no, those games against Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, and Oregon, and all, you know, back into the season, that's where USC's got to make their money. That's where they put themselves in their minds over the top to get into that playoff picture. That's their goal. I would say the expectations for USC this year are, hey, it's playoff or bust, right? I mean, that's kind of where they're at, I would say. You got the returning Heisman winner. That in of itself should make you a national contender.
And I think the Trojans will have a good year. I think they'll have another probably 11-win season, I would say. You get all those big games in a row, you're bound to lose one. That's just kind of how that works. I don't think they have the defense to hold on every single time, especially if you get into a few shootouts with a Washington or an Oregon. And a Colorado, according to Tyler. There we go. He said it. We got him on a record. But, folks, it'll be fun to see. And, of course, if the Trojans can get there back to the Pac-12 title game, we're going to have to see what happens because Lincoln Riley, he's still got to try to end that playoff drought he has. He can make it there. He hasn't won the big one yet. Hasn't won a Pac-12 championship yet either. We'll have to see about that. But it's going to be an interesting season for USC. I really think it will. I would think they would be improved, but every time you know, like I said earlier, this is the trap almost. You're going to if you're a USC fan, welcome to my life for the last however long we've been doing this. All right, this is the year the defense will improve. Okay, everything's looking great. Bear Alexander slimmed down. This is going great. Yeah. And then you realize it doesn't work. You know, you could force turnovers. That wasn't the problem. The problem was you couldn't tackle anybody. The problem,
Jarman soft. That was the problem. No
that was the problem. I know.
Yeah.
It was just absolutely a problem. We'll see if it persists for USC. But looking at the second team on the list here, number 2 in the preseason media poll for the Pac-12, it's Washington. And Washington, 11-2 last year, had a big season. And when you bring back Michael Penix Jr. and that fun offense.
Big Penix.
There you go.
Baby.
There you go.
I just had to get it.
You just had to get it in there. But Washington, they have a pretty favorable schedule, too, to start the year. I would expect 5-0, maybe 4-1 if something really goes wrong somewhere in there, but more than likely not going to happen. You get that bye week, and then it's Oregon.
Yeah.
And that's a big-time game. And you look at the rest of the schedule. I mean, you go to USC, Utah, at Oregon State, and then the Apple Cup. That is a packed November for Washington.
Yeah, and we'll talk about more as we go along, but you've kind of mentioned it off air, is just that divide in this conference. You know, there's about 5 teams that are really going to be scrapping at the top for it, and they all kind of play each other seemingly right in the row, you know, right there at the end of the season. So for Washington, it's just how consistent can he be? Can Michael Penix stay healthy? That's been the story of his career, and then can he produce off that? Really, for them, it's just, can you bring that defense right? And that's going to be kind of the theme with a lot of these teams, especially for Washington. It's in the secondary. You know, not so much up front. They're good up front. You're facing some high-powered offenses, especially through the air. Oregon, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams at USC. Utah, if Cam Rising's healthy, he provides that dual threat. He can sling it a little bit. Oregon State, Washington State, we know can sling with Cam Ward there. So, you know, all those teams, you got to be able to stop through the air. So if they could do that, Washington could find themselves maybe on top of the conference by the end of it.
And see, Washington, you're going to hear me say this a lot more than likely when we go through all the top teams because they're almost all exactly built the same way. I could see Washington being a 10-win team. It would not surprise me. They won 11 games last year, but you just look at how many big games in a row they're having to play, especially in that November. Odds are, with how they're built, you're going to either split them or you're going to drop one to somebody. That's just kind of how I look at it. You get all those games bound in a row, everyone kind of so equally put together. That's just how the top half of the Pac-12 is this year. Everyone's going to kind of cannibalize each other.
Well, and I was about to say, we've seen this in the Big 12 sometimes. You get that worry of, okay, you know, all these teams are at least not much separation between them. Maybe this, unfortunately, turns into a situation for the conference where your conference championship teams are 9 and 10-win teams, and you're essentially out of the playoff race, right? It's just not so much that every team's bad. It's just they're all right there with each other. I think USC, obviously, and Washington have a better chance than the rest to separate themselves in that sense. But, yeah, you absolutely run that risk with the way the schedule breaks out.
And I would say, you know, Washington double-digit wins is the goal again. Of course, you want to get to the Pac-12 championship game. But we're going to have to see because, as we'll see for the next few teams as well, it is going to be absolutely just jam-packed with talent. The next team, Utah, really the curveball here of the group. Utah, Kyle Whittingham, what he's been able to do, just building that program up, building it on defense and toughness, building it on just being a physical team that's not afraid to go at you, you know, whether it be on offense, more of a power run game when need be, not afraid to throw it, like you mentioned earlier, Cam Rising being there, but mainly relying on having a just stingy defense at times, which you really need in the Pac-12 to try to combat all these high-power offenses.
Yeah, and we know they're going to be there defensively. It's really that offensive side of the ball first. Cam Rising is returning from a torn ACL. How fast will he be able to come back from that in terms of getting to his form? Then can they continue to sustain in that running game? They do that better than most in the conference, if not the best, in terms of just being able to run that physical style. And then schedule-wise, they kind of get a lot of tough breaks, right? Like those first 2 games are not easy. Florida, you get Baylor in Waco. At Oregon State's not easy. You go to USC. You do get Oregon at home, but then you got Washington on the road there. So, you know, of the top 5 teams, Utah's kind of the one I think has the most mystery to it, simply because of those 2 issues. Tougher schedule, and then it really hinges on, can Cam Rising return and be what he was last year, which was a big X factor.
And, I mean, we saw this with Utah last year. They went 10-4 to start the year. You lose to Florida.
Yeah.
And they kind of always seem to have that one little bump in the road that just comes out of nowhere, kind of resets the season, or sometimes when it's game 1, just completely changes your perspective. Utah doesn't have the playoff hype like they did last year.
Right.
They don't have any of that going with them. And I think that kind of makes them more dangerous, though. They're still there. They're still picked 3rd in the Pac-12 before we even get anything going. But there's that kind of idea that here they are, once again, lurking around, just waiting to see who they can sneak up on, which there's only 2 teams in front of them. But, hey, you get 2 of them on the road, Utah could play as well at home and on the road. I mean, Utah's one of those teams that toughness travels everywhere. That's not one of those special home field things. But like you said, having to play Florida and then go to Baylor, there are no breaks here. And I love it. I love getting these tough schedules like this. I wish we saw more of that here in college football. Then, of course, you go to Oregon State. Corvallis is not a fun place to play. You go to USC. You get Oregon at home, which is kind of that big one there. But having it right after USC kind of negates that as the circle, oh, here we go. This is the Utah does Utah things type of game. But it's going to be weird to see, man. I mean, you're going to hear me say this a lot, especially through the next few teams, but just that top and bottom difference in the Pac-12 is just, I mean, it's night and day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just insane to see, you got 5 high-powered teams. They can just do whatever it feels like. They got UCLA, who's kind of that mediator, I guess you could say, where they're not bad by any means, but they're not up there with the other 5.
Yeah.
And then you just got the bottom half. It'll be fun to see how the season plays out. But, I mean, looking at that schedule, it's the same thing. You got USC, Oregon, then the Arizona State kind of break, and then Washington. I mean, these schedule makers are trying to make sure everything is just as big and action-packed as they can in that little stretch.
Yeah, but I will say with Utah, just with their schedule, we'll know who they are pretty quick.
Well, yeah.
Florida Baylor game, probably their earliest of the Pac-12 teams.
I would say so. It would not surprise me, though, to see Utah get off to a pretty good start like they usually do and just continue to work their way on, try to fight for another 10-win season in there. And that brings us to Oregon, and what a shocker, folks. It's a similar story. Bo Nix staying again. Insert the funny meme about, this is his year, he's a dark horse for the Heisman. You've probably seen that meme at some point in your life if you follow college football extensively.
Hey, you know what? That meme allowed me to sell a signed Bo Nix Bowman University card that was like out of $99 for $50 last year. So thank you to the memes.
There we go. Help you make money. So
that's right.
I mean, Bo Nix is not alone. Obviously, you got Bucky Irving at running back. You've got a solid defense, too. But the main thing for me with Oregon, the only thing they lacked in Dan Lanning's first year, they went 10-3, but they weren't consistent. There were some moments where, just watching him or just trying to figure out some of the decisions Dan Lanning, he likes to be aggressive with it. I think he was way too aggressive. There were some times where you're going for it on 4th and 2 at your own 25 in a tie game or a game where you're up by 7 in the fourth quarter. I'm just looking at that going, I understand wanting to put the game away, but your defense has been playing solid to that point where it didn't make any sense to me. Hopefully, tones that back just a little bit. Or if the defense can play as consistent, we'll have to see. Maybe we get both. Who knows?
Well, and to combo that for Lanning and the aggressiveness, the problem was he had a quarterback in Bo Nix and still does as a gunslinger, right?
Yeah.
So he could kind of be a little too aggressive himself. So you're right. They got to tone that down just a touch. Before we get to the schedule, I think the biggest question mark with Oregon, Cade, is that offensive line. They've got 4 new starters. Defensively, I think they'll be fine. Offensively, they could be high-powered with Nix at the helm. They put up a lot of points last year. But 4 new starters on offensive line when you're trying to compete in already a very tough top end of the conference, as we talked about, that's going to take some time to mesh. And as we look at the schedule, before the bye week isn't bad, but you do have that road game at Texas Tech. That can throw you some fits.
It can. I mean, that early in the season, that can be one of those, not going to say a sleeper game
Sure.
because of where it's placed at. That's going to be one of the marquee games of the week. But it's one of those that you look at Oregon's schedule, and the nice part about it is after that Texas Tech game, you get through the next 4 weeks there. Yeah. Everything's kind of spread out more. You know, right. You have a nice, not to say a free win in between, but you have, Washington State, you have Cal, you have Arizona State, which, then again, Arizona State, Oregon doesn't do well in Arizona. That's one of those weird, you see those teams pop up from time to time when they're at home. USC, Oregon State, Utah, and Washington, we'll have to see. Yeah. There's a very good possibility you get 2 of those on the road, 2 of them at home, perfectly balanced, as it should be. But, hey, Oregon's going to have problems. I really think, they're probably going to be the one to struggle the most. Like you mentioned, 4 new offensive linemen. I think at some point that's going to play a toll. Maybe that's more of a Utah type of game where they're able to get up front with them and battle it in the trenches a bit more, make Nix a bit more uncomfortable. Maybe it's so early on as Texas Tech. I think Oregon's going to struggle the most of them. I could see Oregon being more of a 9-10 win team instead of trying to get up there towards that 11. And don't discount Oregon State either. We're about to get to them here in a moment, but they're thinking this is the year. We'll have to see. But, hey, when you get Pac-12 after dark madness, Tyler, anything can happen.
That's right.
That is correct. And speaking of Oregon State, they've got one of the bigger transfers. At the time, it was one of the biggest transfers. DJ Uiagalelei going from Clemson to Oregon State. And that really filled Oregon State's big need because they were a solid, sound, feisty defensive team. They had a good running game. They just didn't have a quarterback that could settle them down and really guide them through the games.
Yeah, and, I know people look at DJ and what he did at Clemson and say, well, I don't know if he fits that description of improving that, but I think in this case, new scenery is going to really help him and kind of give him a fresh start. And I think, Cade, of all of the teams after USC and Washington that have the best chance to just kind of sneak up there and compete, I really like Oregon State as that team to maybe do that. Schedule-wise, you look at it, Utah game, obviously, you get that at home, so that's a bit easier. That's a break in that. You don't have to play USC in this schedule. You avoid them entirely, right? And so that kind of allows you to really circle those 2 last games. You get Washington at home, and then you got to go to Oregon. But the rest of the schedule breaks pretty well for them. I mean, you get Utah home, you get past that. I could see where this Oregon State team maybe sneaks up there and finds themselves in a spot to, maybe sneak away a Pac-12 championship.
And that's where I'm at with it. I mean, you look at Oregon State's schedule, and you already mentioned the no USC. Washington and Oregon are back-to-back at the end of the year.
Right.
You have Utah as the 5th game, and then you get a nice break from all of that. You don't have to go through anyone else for a while. Gives you some time to kind of, if you have some injuries, maybe deal with those. Maybe try to, you have all this time to adjust, basically, before you get Washington at home.
Yeah.
And then you go to Oregon, which, keep in mind, that was a game Oregon State won last year in a big comeback win.
Yes.
Oregon State, I mean, they're the dark horse, I would say. If you had to pick one of the teams, getting Utah at home, getting Washington at home, no USC, they have everything laid in front of them, Tyler, to really be a 10 or 11 win team. And considering they went 10-3 last year, it's something Oregon State doesn't do often. This could be that big year for the Beavers.
Yeah, and Jonathan Smith's got this program moving in the right direction, right? I mean, he's pulled all the right things out in the transfer portal, filled a lot of needs. Talked about the quarterback position, how that could be an upgrade this year. Has just done a great job of doing more with less. And that's, Oregon State is definitely one of the schools where you got to do that. And, there's been coaches that have been able to do it in the past, but I don't know to this level. So Coach Smith has a real chance to kind of put his stamp on, what could be a big-time run for Oregon State.
And that brings us kind of more towards the middle of the pack, so to speak.
The fun part of the Pac-12.
Yeah, the interesting part of the Pac-12. Chip Kelly at UCLA in his 6th year. UCLA went 9-4 last year. They, of course, don't have any DTR magic of Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They still have Carson Steele at running back, and they still have some interesting players there. Dante Moore, of course, is the big quarterback name for UCLA this year. Can he live up to the hype? We're going to have to see. But UCLA, I mean, the first 3 games, how about Coastal Carolina? How about playing the Chanticleers late night in the Rose Bowl? San Diego State, you get a nice little regional game there. NC Central welcoming a HBCU, and I believe one of the, if I can't remember correctly, if it's the first FCS team to ever play UCLA or not, but if it's not, it's pretty darn close.
Right.
And then you go to Utah, the bye week, Washington State at Oregon State. And then you start to get a little bit of a break of Stanford, Colorado, the Arizonas. And then you get back to the end of it with good old USC and the battle for the victory bell there.
Yeah, and you avoid Oregon in the schedule, right?
Yeah.
So that's a plus. And, you mentioned the guy, Dante Moore, the freshman, expected to maybe win the job early. He might not straight away start as the guy because true freshman, it's tough to just put the guy in there and trial by fire, but he's supposed to be the real deal. So if he is, this may be a season where you say it winds up at 7 or 8 wins, but you have really good hope for the future, considering what you see out of Dante Moore. The big issue for them, it was an issue last year, it remains an issue. And it kind of puzzles me that Chip Kelly's having an issue with it at UCLA because he's really good at doing it at Oregon. With that up-tempo play style, they typically had some really nasty defenses, that kind of got overshadowed by that offense.
Yeah.
Because it was just so explosive, right? But they had, for as up-tempo as they were, that defense did a lot of great work. He hadn't been able to do that at UCLA yet. Hadn't really been able to put it together on the defensive side of the ball. And that's something that's kind of plagued them. They give up points, They score, but they give up some points. So if they could corral that a bit, maybe they could kind of come close to what they did last year. I'm not expecting more than 9 wins, but, they got a shot. I mean, they're just, like we're talking about, they're kind of that lone wild card separated from the bottom half of the Pac-12 that you don't quite know, can they leapfrog some of those teams ahead of them? It all depends for me on that defense and Dante Moore.
Yeah, I mean, 9 wins, I would say, is probably about the highest UCLA can get to. Yeah. I mean, you look at Utah, at Oregon State, at USC. You mentioned no Oregon, no Washington as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you avoid 2 of the big 5 there, and then, of course, you got your rivalries. But if they can somehow just sneak one of those of Utah or Oregon State.
Oh, you're pushing for 10 wins.
I mean, then you're pushing for 10, and you're pushing for Saturday, November 18th, trying to play and get a spot in the Pac-12 title game.
Could you imagine with the freshmen? No, I'd say really, though, anything where they wind up in that 6-6 to 8-4 range, that's probably a successful season. That probably means Dante Moore showed enough to be like, hey, guys, we got this in the future. This is the guy. So I think that's kind of the goal now. The question is, will the fans accept that? I don't know, but I would say realistically that's probably, to me, where UCLA winds up.
And that's what I kind of agree with. I think this is more of a rebuilding, reloading, whatever you want to call it, type of year anyway. Not a full 100% rebuild with Dante Moore waiting in the wings, but just kind of a trial run for this year and then build back up. And then Washington State. So we've officially made our way towards the bottom tier of the Pac-12. Washington State, 7-6 last year, and the Cougars have had some good defensive players. They still got some for this year, whether it be, a Ron Stone Jr. on the defensive line with Brennan Jackson, whether it be Chow Smith-Wade as a defensive back. The Cougars have talent. Of course, Cam Ward, whenever he can sling the ball, that's always a good sign. Wazoo, they're kind of, I would say, like we said in the Big 12 preview, what I'd call like a low-tier wild card, where they still have that ability to compete with times with their offense and defense, but not as much to the extent as UCLA.
Yeah, I mean, the issues they face is they don't have the huge talent, right, on paper. Yeah. They're going to lose out the talent battle. Cam Ward is nice. He could do some things. Their biggest struggle is going to absolutely, and it was a problem for him last year that led to Ward kind of running for his life. That offensive line is still not much improved. So when you don't have, a reliable offensive line and you have to go play at Oregon, you go play at Washington, and even some of these games at Cal and at Arizona State that initially you might not think about being tough, but when you don't have the offensive line to compete, makes them a lot tougher. That kind of hinders, I think, the upper limit on what Washington State could do. Probably could be a bowl team pretty well, but it's just, can they go much more than that 7-8 win cap? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and that's where I stand. They could be a 5-win team. They could be a 7-win team. it kind of depends on, the offensive line. That's one of the biggest ones. If you can get Cam Ward a little bit of just any sense of presence.
Room to breathe, man.
Yeah, just any room at all. If he's scrambling for his life, it's going to be a rough day. You give him any time to make some decisions, he's going to let it loose. And that moves us on to Arizona as we continue to move on. Arizona 8th in the preseason poll, and Arizona 5-7 last year. You still have Jaden Delore. You still have an offense that can go at times, but same problem a lot of the Pac-12 teams face. Your defense at times is suspect. Sometimes it's just straight up bad. Sometimes you do have those moments of good and great in there, but you have to balance everything, and that's something that Arizona's had a lot of trouble. You've gone through all these errors trying to get everything fixed. You had the Khalil Tate moments for a little bit. He looked like he could be the guy, and you had the Kevin Sumlin trials and everything going there, and I mean, you look at what Jed Fish has been doing. He's trying to turn this thing around to the best of his ability, but 6-18 in the first 2 years.
Yeah, and they did make that improvement though. You mentioned 5-7; they went 1-11. That was that year cleaning everything out from just disastrous Kevin Sumlin. And they come back with some pieces. The biggest issue, they got to find some guys that can be physical on defense. You mentioned that a little bit. Cade, they gave up 200 yards on the ground per game last year. They couldn't stop the run, man. And I know you're in a league that's more pass happy, but you still got to be able to stop the run. You still got to show some physicality. So that's going to be the biggest question for them. Schedule-wise, you got Washington at home. Okay, you're not talented enough to win that, unfortunately. At USC, that's a tough one. Get Oregon State at home. Get not talented enough. Get Utah at home. I mean, those are all nice home games, but you just lose on the talent battle. You avoid Oregon, but, I mean, it's just, it's one of those deals similar to what we just talked about with West Washington State. What's your real upper limit, right? Maybe if everything breaks your way, 7 wins, somewhere in there, which you'll take. But that's kind of the goal here. Can you push for bowl eligibility here? That's what you're shooting for, really.
And that's going to be the tough spot for Arizona because I could see them kind of bouncing around, still trying to, you mentioned the run defense being absolutely horrible. Yeah. You could be a 4-win team. You could be anywhere to a 7-win team. It's just, can you get that consistency? Can you get that defense whipped into shape for the right game?
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically what it's going to come down to for Arizona. Unfortunately, with everything stacked the way it is, I mean, having to go to USC, you've got Utah, you've got Oregon State, you've got Washington all at home, but unfortunately, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Maybe you're able to sneak one of them there. If you get really lucky, someone else comes in on a bad day, something like that. Try to hang around for enough and hope for an upset, but it's going to be brutal again for Arizona. I would not be surprised with another 4 to 5 win season.
Yeah, and like I said, if you could, and so in between that Oregon State, the Utah games there, UCLA at home, that's a little bit more winnable maybe. But get your lower teams, your Washington States, your Colorado, your Arizona State there, those are on the road. Makes those just a tough, harder when you're trying to find some of that consistency with some of those younger guys. Not that you're necessarily at a talent disparity with those teams, but it's just one of those deals where you're on the road environment, you got guys that are not quite as battle-tested. Great things happen. We've seen that.
And that brings us over to Cal. Justin Wilcox in his 7th year at Cal and 4-8 last year for the Golden Bears. Now, they do have some key players like Jay Nott at running back and Jackson Sermon at linebacker, but Cal is one of those teams that every time I watch them, Tyler, I try to catch a few of their games, that Pac-12 After Dark window or something like that. Cal is always one of those teams that stands out to me that every time I watch them, no matter what they're doing, they're right there with somebody. And they look like they have the pieces not to win, but to at least compete. And then for whatever reason, it gets to the 4th quarter, and they just melt.
Yeah.
They just fall apart. The depth isn't there. The mentality isn't there. They're good enough to lose, basically. They're good enough to play you hard for 3 quarters, and then they just fall apart. And, I mean, you look at Cal's schedule. They get that Auburn home game. They go to Washington. Oregon State's at home. You go to Utah. You get USC at Oregon. It's brutal. It's brutal again for Cal when you're trying to fight everybody here in the conference. They're picked 9th, and that's probably a good place for them. maybe move them a little bit lower. Who knows? But Cal's in a rough spot right now. And they've been here for a while. That's just where their program is.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you look at their schedule. North Texas is winnable. Idaho is winnable. Not saying they're going to win. I'm just saying winnable. Tyler.
I mean,
you're giving me the look of like, what are you talking about
so
here?
the North Texas game, I'm telling you, that might be a tough one. That might be an early rally check. Yes, Idaho, they should win. I think Stanford, they should win. Stanford's pretty
bad.
Bowl and shoe ugly. They're pretty ugly. The rest of that schedule, though, yeah, I don't know if you find many more wins outside of those two games. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, like I'm thinking, it's probably going to be anywhere from 2, maybe 4 if you get lucky.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a brutal time for Cal.
The problem with them right now, they have got to find some solid footing on the offensive side of the ball to help that defense. Their defense was returning 10 starters.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to have guys with experience on that side of the ball, but now you're in another spot where you've got some talent coming back on the offensive side of the ball, but your line isn't really that good. Gave up 31 sacks last year, and you got a new scheme. So, how quickly does that come together? And we know sometimes once the season gets going, if you're not there, it'll be real tough to put that together during the season.
And that moves us to Arizona State. And now that we're here, Tyler, it's going to be interesting. The final 3 teams, all in the Pac-12, first-year head coaches. Kenny Dillingham taking over a 3-9 Sun Devil team that, let's just face it, was not good at all. I mean, you have several transfers coming in. You got Drew Pine from Notre Dame coming in trying to fight for that quarterback spot. You have Jaden Rashada, who's one of the highly touted prospects. You have Trenton Bogart, who was there last year, who was kind of that starting quarterback role whenever he needed to be. But you have Cameron Scatabo here as well. He can be a fun running back to watch. But Arizona State, I mean, they have some offensive pieces, and we'll see how they plug and play there. Quarterback battle is going to be fun to watch, but I don't know if the defense will, Tyler.
Yeah, allowed 31 points last year. You could only do so much to improve that through the portal. You could try, but, it's just one of those deals. Then offensive line, 4 new starters there. So this is going to be a year for Coach Dillingham where kind of similar to what we saw last year there with Coach 2 years ago with Coach Fish, when they went 11-1 for Arizona, or 1-11, excuse me, reverse that. He was cleaning out some gunk from the Kevin Sumlin era. Fortunately, Coach Dillingham is going to have to do that from, the Herm Edwards.
Yes.
So this Arizona State team, I want to be optimistic. You went 3-9 last year despite all that dysfunction, but you look at the schedule, you're at Utah, you're at UCLA, you're at Washington. You get Oregon home, but you still got to play them. You got to play USC. I mean, that's 5 teams right there. I don't know if they'll beat. Washington State's not a gimme, even though it's your homecoming. At California, we talked about them. That could be a coin flip. I mean, you got to play Oklahoma State early in the season, too. The only guaranteed win I see on the schedule is Southern Utah. Other than that, everything else is up for grabs.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say 3-9 is probably where they can get back to, but that's
not much higher than that.
I would say that's probably best case scenario for them is 3-9. You just don't want to be in 1-11, and I'm just going to say that Southern Utah game. Southern Utah can be a feisty team. We see this from the Big Sky every once in a while.
That's true.
You get one of those
Eastern
teams,
Washington, man.
Eastern Washington, Montana against Washington a few years ago, Northern Arizona. If you're not careful, one of those teams can come up and bite you. And if that happens to Arizona State, it could be a more than a rough start to the season. It would just be basically starting the avalanche and letting the countdown to 0-12 possibly begin.
The one thing I'm interested to see with him the most is probably how soon do they go to Jaden Rashada.
Yeah.
I think at some point in the season he will get a couple cracks at it. Remember, you got the 4-game rule when it comes to the red shirts.
Yeah.
You get late in the season, you're 1-8 or something like that. I could see them kind of trying to see what they got in him. And if that's a guy that flashes some of that potential he may have, that's a good recruit that they got in there. He could kind of set some foundation for things going forward. But, yeah, you're right. We don't want to say 0-12, but, man, I mean, this could be a rough season, definitely, for the Sun Devils.
It very well could be. And that brings us to Colorado.
Oh, boy.
The interesting, the team of mystery, so
Coach
to speak.
Fry.
Yeah, Deion Sanders here at his first year at Colorado. 1-11 last year, the Buffs. They're going to be one of the just most intriguing teams in college football this year, to put it lightly. First game at TCU, rematch of last year. We talked about with TCU when we did our Big 12 preview. That was a 1-point game at halftime. And then Max Duggan comes in for an injured Chandler Morris, and everything changes. Now, Colorado does have some good players. Obviously, when you flip 90% of your team, it feels like at least 80%, something like that, somewhere in that range. They have Travis Hunter, who's a good wide receiver, good defensive.
Was the number one overall prospect.
Number one overall prospect. Yeah. They have Shedeur Sanders, of course, Deion Sanders' kid, played
quarterback
back at Jackson State. Here's what I'm intrigued about with Colorado. I think they have the possibility to maybe get 2 or 3 wins, because that's really all you need if you're Colorado this year to be a success. You went 1-11, 1-11 last year. To me, if I was a Colorado fan, just any sign of improvement. You've already shown more improvement in the offseason than the team did last year. That's all. You're already off to a good start there. Now you just got to prove it on the field. TCU, not going to happen. Nebraska is going to be a big game. It's going to be hyped. We obviously disagree on who's going to win that game. I think Nebraska's still going to be the better team. I think Matt Rule's going to come out with something to prove and win that game. Colorado State, Colorado should win that game. They should beat Colorado State.
Yep.
Oregon, they're not going to win. USC, they're not going to win. Arizona State's, that's I'll say coin flip mainly just because it's at Tempe. Stanford's a winnable game. They should probably beat Stanford. That's 2. UCLA, no. Oregon State, no. Arizona, if they catch them at the bad time, maybe you could find a 3rd win there. But other than that, 2 to 3 at most is what I see out of Colorado.
So here's what I see on the schedule. I completely agree. Oregon, USC, TCU, Utah, and Oregon State. That's 5 teams you're not beating.
Yeah.
Okay. Especially with that first game being on the road. No way. So that's 7 possible wins. I would contend that those other 7 games are possible for Colorado. That's right. I'm saying they could push for bowl eligibility. Because this is not, this is, folks, when we talk about a completely different team, this is a whole new group.
It is.
From top down, it is a whole new group. So it's why I contend for them to push for maybe more wins, because they're going to sneak up on some teams. I think, you mentioned Stanford, they should win. Should win Colorado State. That's why I fear for Matt Rule in Nebraska, because they coming into Boulder now. That's going to be the first home game of the Coach Prime era. That is going to be a raucous environment. And I think that could really boost that team. At Arizona State, we talked about their issues. You look at these teams, even UCLA, if Dante Moore isn't ready yet and they struggle a little bit with him, that all of a sudden turns into a winnable game for Colorado if UCLA is struggling offensively. Colorado's issue, I think the one thing that you can't fix overnight is defense, right?
Yeah.
And that where it's at. I think Oregon, USC, those elite offenses, Oregon State, Utah will expose that, and TCU for that matter. But those other teams all have their own issues when it comes to defense, and offensively it's not like they're juggernauts. So that's why I contend there's 7 winnable games for Colorado outside those big 5 we talked about. Now, will they win them? If you get into shootouts, anything could happen. Injuries happen. You're not going to be deep enough if you get some injuries stacked up to deal with that for Colorado.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to claim that they're guaranteed 7. I'm just saying the possibilities there. And if Coach Prime goes 6-6 or 7-5 in the first year, watch out, because those recruits are going to come calling, especially with them moving back to the Big 12.
Well, I think they're going to come calling anyways. Even
sure.
Whether they go, and win.
Saying the process will be massively
Yeah, it'll be completely different. It won't be, looking at this as a 3-year thing. It'll be looking at it as, we can do this tomorrow,
right? Type
of deal. But I think he's going to do a good job there. He's a great recruiter. You were able to turn Jackson State from, just a normal FCS HBCU into one of the top 3, playing in the HBCU National Championship, basically, in the Celebration Bowl, able to do that. Colorado will be fun to watch. They'll be intriguing. I'm just not sold on how they're going to be in the Pac-12. I think they'll be competitive at times, especially against the bottom of the Pac-12. They'll beat someone like a Stanford. They can beat someone like an Arizona State. They can beat a Colorado State even. I mean, that's a rivalry game. That place will be rowdy for that. Nebraska, like you said, first home game, big rivalry. They'll be hyped for that game. It'll be absolutely insane atmosphere-wise. I just don't know if they can hold on for 4 quarters against someone, when we get to the bigger teams, like a UCLA or an Arizona or Washington State. I don't know if they can hold on for 4 quarters while they're under assault and just everyone's throwing it over them. I don't know when it comes to that. I don't know if they have the depth to do that yet.
But the other teams, I don't think, have the depth to necessarily overpower them. That's my whole point.
That's the thing. But they're at Washington State, at UCLA. To me, that plays a little bit of a difference. You're at home. You have that home crowd behind you.
You're late enough in the season at that point. You either know what you are or aren't if you're Colorado. That's the thing. The schedule breaks pretty well for you in the sense that you're going to take some lumps early season, right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing. You're going to be able, after that game against TCU, Coach Brian's going to be able to look at those guys and say, hey, we may not play a tougher challenge until Oregon's probably what? Oregon, USC right there, that stretch tough. But you got that stretch 2 and 3. Coach Brian's going to be able to say, look, we're not going to play any tougher than that in terms of remaining opponents, right? Yeah. And if, Utah's not what they are because Cam Rising still has issues at the end of the season, I'm just saying, those games against Oregon State and Utah are tough, but at the same time, they're not going to be as tough as the Oregon USC games. And again, it may not matter much because the depth and things of that nature. It just, Colorado intrigues me as a team to, the momentum that can be achieved if they wind up going 6-6 or 7-5. Oh boy.
Well, see, to me, they're interested because they're almost like a case study on how much of a team can you flip.
Right.
How much of a team can you truly change in 1 year and see what happens? Because, you're practically doing that.
That's the thing, though. That's the intriguing part is that a lot of those guys have been with Coach Prime. Right?
Yeah.
That's the other part of it. So, I don't know. I just, like him or hate him in terms of his coaching style. I know he's polarizing for a lot of people. The dude's got experience.
He does.
He could get it done. And I'm telling you, folks, people were mystified that when Hunter chose to go to Jackson State with him in the first place. It's like, you got to understand, when you could go to a kid as a coach and say, hey, I'm in the NFL Hall of Fame, right? I could teach you the ways of how to be professional.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Billy Napier and the rest of those guys that weren't able to achieve that. That's a different level. That's powerful to a kid. And when the coach then furthers that by saying, hey, not only am I a Hall of Famer, I've assembled a staff of guys who also have achieved at a high level in the NFL. That's big. Mm-hmm. Now, how much success does that translate on the field? I really think it's intriguing the approach Coach Prime's taking.
Yeah, it's an experiment to be sure. Yeah. It is almost, this mad scientist approach to football, Absolutely. But we're going to find out how well it works. And that's the thing. I think we're both excited to see how well this thing works.
So if Maryland wins 10 games and Colorado becomes bowl eligible, I will buy a half Maryland state flag, half Colorado hoodie and sweats. Split down the middle.
If you're going to...
the ugliest apparel of all time.
Honestly, what would be funnier to me, and we'll get to Stanford in a moment here.
Okay.
We'll get to Stanford in a moment here. But, if you take, the Colorado state flag, the C, the red C and the yellow, and just stamp that on the Maryland flag, just make it some abomination of a thing. It would be horrible looking. But moving on to Stanford before we dwell on that way too long, Troy Taylor coming over. It's going to be his first year. Obviously, it's going to be weird seeing Stanford without David Shaw there. What he was able to do at Stanford, just a mainstay for a while for the Cardinal. But Stanford, they went 3-9 last year. They had one Pac-12 win, and it's bleak. I'll just be honest with Stanford. It is a bad time. It is not a good time to be a Stanford fan when it comes to football. You have some battles for the QB job with Ashton Daniels and Ari Patu, who was the starter for the second half of last year. there's really nothing exciting about Stanford right now, Tyler. The defense wasn't great. The offense isn't amazing. There's nothing really going on here. It honestly would not surprise me. They play Sacramento State right after USC. Watch out. That could be a way close.
Sacramento State was a pretty and has been a pretty solid program now.
Yeah.
So
that could be a shocker game.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the schedule, really, like, as you mentioned, just because of the way, you got to immediately turn around after getting thumped by USC and then get up for a home game like that. Is it fair to say that Hawaii is the only guaranteed win maybe on the schedule?
And I don't even know if Hawaii is a guaranteed win. That's late. That's at Hawaii.
Dang.
You never know. Hawaii could come out home opener and just go crazy on them. Hawaii will be coming back from Vandy.
Yeah.
They'll have a little bit of time to prepare for that and go, okay, depending on how well Hawaii does against Vandy, which I have no idea how that game will go either. I would think Vandy wins it, but we'll have to see. But, I mean, Stanford, you take any of the Pac-12 teams, I'm not favoring them to win a single game in the conference. And that leaves you with, what else? Notre Dame, they're not winning that. That puts you at 10 losses right there. Sacramento State and Hawaii. Those are your two possible wins. And I think both of those can be dogfights.
Yeah.
They might go 0-12 or 1-11, Tyler.
It'll be one of those seasons where, again, you just got to hit the low points and try to climb back out of it and build back up. So.
Yeah. That's really all you can do there if you're Stanford. But, folks, thank you, as always, for tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to smash that like button. Hit the subscribe button as well while you're at it. Hit that bell. Turn notifications on if you want to. I'd appreciate it. It's the least you can do. It seems like, something so little, but it does mean a lot to us. And, as always, leave a comment down below. Are we both wrong about Colorado? Is one of us right or wrong?
Well,
we'll
can't
have to
both
see.
be wrong because one of us highs on.
What if they win like 5 games and they hit right in the middle? You said 7 winnable. I said 3, and they hit right in the middle.
I said 7 winnable. I'd say they win 7.
You're being that guy. Okay,
I'm just saying.
I know you're doing the thing, but that's okay, Tyler.
It's because they're 1-10.
It's
Coach
3:30 in the morning. But anyway, folks, as always, I hope you appreciated it. You got the ACC preview coming out soon, so you'll want to stick around for that. And until next time, have a good one, everybody.